I never thought I'd hear my wife of 10 years call me an idiot while talking to another man, but that's exactly what happened. She laughed about how clueless I was and confidently told him I didn't suspect a thing. She was right about one thing. Until that moment, I really didn't. After that, I let her keep believing her idiot husband was completely in the dark. That turned out to be a very bad mistake for both of them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. 10 years into our marriage, Elise and I were doing fine. At least that's what I thought before Tyler came back into the picture. I trusted Elise, completely, which, as I later discovered, was apparently hilarious. Tyler had been part of her life long before me. They dated years ago, and I knew enough about him to recognize the name, but not enough to care. He was an ex. Ancient history. Then one evening, Elise mentioned him over dinner. "Tyler messaged me today." I looked up. "Tyler?" "My ex." "Oh, that Tyler." She smiled. "How many Tylers do you think I dated?" "I don't know. I never requested the full database. He moved back recently. Good for him." And that was honestly all I thought about it. She told me he'd been reconnecting with old friends and had reached out to her. They'd exchanged a few messages, caught up on what had happened over the years, the usual stuff. I wasn't jealous, I wasn't suspicious, and I definitely wasn't going to become one of those husbands who demanded to inspect his wife's phone because a man had sent her a message. We'd been married 10 years. If 10 years didn't buy us enough trust for her to have a conversation with an ex, then we had bigger problems. Turns out we did. I just hadn't received the memo yet. For the first couple of weeks, Tyler's name came up occasionally. Then it started coming up a little more. He had a good position at his company. He was making good money. He had ambitious plans. His bosses liked him. Elise seemed to know quite a bit about all of this. One evening, she was looking at her phone while I was making dinner. "Tyler might be getting promoted." I glanced over. "Should we send flowers?" "I'm serious." "So am I." "Maybe a balloon." She rolled her eyes. "His company is competing for a huge contract. If they get it, he'll probably move into a senior position." "Good for Tyler." "You keep saying that." "Because I'm happy for him. I'm running out of ways to celebrate a stranger's career." "He's not a stranger. To you." She looked at me for a second. I kept chopping vegetables. There wasn't any tension in the room, at least none that I noticed. "He's changed a lot," she said. "He used to be kind of irresponsible. And now? Focused, ambitious. Excellent. There's hope for all of us." She laughed. That should have been the end of it. Except Tyler kept appearing in conversations. Not constantly. Elise wasn't stupid enough for that. Just enough that I started noticing. Tyler was working late because of the contract. Tyler had an important meeting. Tyler's company was apparently one of the strongest candidates. Tyler thought the deal could completely change his career. At one point, I knew so much about his professional life that I briefly considered adding him to my LinkedIn network just to make the relationship official. What I noticed most was the way Elise talked about him. She was impressed, not in some cartoonishly obvious way. She didn't stare dreamily into the distance every time she said his name. It was subtler than that. She liked what he had become. Successful, driven, promising. One night she said, "It's actually crazy how much he's changed." We were sitting on the couch. I looked away from the television. "Listen, I've been hearing Tyler's name more often than my own lately. Don't start, I'm just sharing my observations. Maybe losing you inspired him." She laughed. "Maybe." I meant it as a joke. Looking back, I'm not sure why that answer didn't bother me more. A few weeks later, we were invited to a barbecue. It was at a friend's house, one of those casual weekend things where everybody says they'll stop by for an hour and somehow ends up staying until evening. There were maybe 15 people there. Food, drinks, music, people moving between the backyard and the veranda. And Tyler. I knew he'd probably be there. By that point, he had reconnected with several people in the same social circle, so seeing him wasn't exactly a dramatic surprise. Elise certainly didn't seem surprised. Tyler came over not long after we arrived. Warren. Tyler. We shook hands. He looked exactly like the version Elise had been advertising for the past few weeks. Expensive watch, nice clothes, confident without trying too hard. The successful returning ex-boyfriend starter package. "How's everything?" he asked. "Can't complain." "Work going well?" "Still paying me, so I assume so." He laughed. We talked for a minute or two. Nothing interesting. He mentioned work briefly, but didn't bring up the contract. I didn't either. Then someone called him over toward the grill and he left. Elise looked at me. "What?" "Nothing." "You're making a face." "This is just my face." "You don't like him?" "I've spoken to the guy for approximately 4 minutes in my entire life." "You can still dislike someone in 4 minutes. That sounds like a challenge." She smiled and walked off to talk to one of her friends. I remember that conversation because it was probably the last completely normal exchange we ever had. For the next hour or so, I barely paid attention to either of them. I talked to people, had a beer, ate more food than I needed. At one point, I watched 2 grown men argue about the correct temperature for cooking steak with the seriousness of diplomats negotiating a ceasefire. Everything was normal. Then I went inside to get another drink. The kitchen was crowded, so after grabbing one from the refrigerator, I used the side door instead of pushing my way back through the house. That door opened onto a narrow path running along the side of the house toward the backyard. The veranda was around the corner. I was halfway down the path when I heard Tyler's voice. I wasn't trying to listen. I probably wouldn't even have slowed down if I hadn't heard my name. "Does Warren suspect anything?" I stopped. For a second, I honestly thought there had to be some harmless explanation. Then Elise laughed and said, "My idiot husband doesn't suspect a thing." I didn't move. Tyler laughed quietly. "You're sure?" "Completely." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know Warren," Tyler said. "So what are we waiting for?" There was a short pause. Then Elise answered. "Your contract. What about it? If your company gets it, you get the promotion." "That's the plan." "Exactly." "Elise, I'm already doing fine." "I know." "Then why are we still waiting?" Her answer came immediately. "Because I'm not giving up a stable life for promises. Get the contract first, get the promotion, then we'll talk." I stared straight ahead. That was the moment everything became perfectly clear. This wasn't some drunken mistake. It wasn't flirting that had gone too far. They were having an affair, and my wife had already thought about leaving me. She just wasn't ready yet. Because Tyler's replacement package hadn't been fully approved. Apparently, after 10 years of marriage, I had been downgraded from husband to temporary financial stability. Tyler asked, "And Warren?" "What about him?" "You're going to have to tell him eventually. When the time comes, I'll deal with him." Deal with me. Very romantic. I was almost touched. Tyler chuckled. "You really think he won't figure it out before that?" Elise didn't hesitate. "Trust me, he won't understand anything until I tell him myself." I stood there for another second. Then I quietly backed away. That was all I needed. I didn't need to hear another word. No detective, no phone records, no dramatic investigation. My wife had just explained the entire situation for free. I went back through the side door, crossed the kitchen, and returned to the backyard from the other direction. Someone near the grill looked at me. "Where'd you disappear to?" "Bathroom." "Grab another beer?" I looked down at the bottle in my hand. Very productive bathroom. He laughed. I did too. And then I saw Elise. She was coming off the veranda. Tyler followed maybe 30 seconds later. Neither of them looked worried. Why would they? As far as they knew, Warren was somewhere inside, happily wandering around with his beer and his limited intellectual capacity. Elise came over. "There you are. I was wondering where you went." "Got a drink." She glanced at the bottle. "Another one?" "It's a barbecue. I'm trying to respect the culture." She smiled. Then she kissed me on the cheek. That was interesting. 10 minutes earlier, she had been discussing when to leave me for another man. Now she had her hand on my arm and was asking whether I wanted another burger. And I realized something. If I confronted her right then, I would get exactly what people always get in situations like that. Denial, excuses, tears. Maybe she'd claim I misunderstood. Maybe Tyler would suddenly become a confused, innocent bystander who had accidentally fallen into an affair. I wasn't interested. More importantly, Elise thought she had time. She thought she controlled the situation. Tyler gets the contract, Tyler gets promoted, Elise leaves Warren. Simple. But they had no idea that that same idiot had heard everything and was already planning a plan. But for now, I stayed at the barbecue and played along. I talked. I laughed. I ate. At one point, Tyler even walked over and joined a conversation I was having with two other people. I treated him exactly the same as before. He relaxed. So did Elise. By the time we drove home that evening, I could tell she was completely convinced I hadn't heard anything. She talked about the barbecue, complained that someone had put too much salt on the chicken, asked whether I'd had a good time. Yeah, I said. Interesting afternoon. She looked at me. Interesting? Sure. How? I shrugged. Good food. Good people. She nodded and looked back out the window. That was it. When we got home, she changed clothes, watched television for a while, and eventually went to bed. I stayed downstairs. For the first time all day, I didn't have to pretend. I was angry. But mostly, I was done. There was no question of fixing the marriage. No counseling. No long conversation about how we had lost our connection. Elise hadn't lost anything. She had made a decision. She was simply waiting for Tyler's career to become secure enough to announce it. Fine. The marriage was over. I accepted that. But sitting there alone, I kept thinking about one specific part of their conversation. The contract. Tyler's company was competing for a major deal. A deal important enough that his promotion apparently depended on it. And Elise was waiting for that promotion before leaving me. There was just one detail neither of them knew. I recognized the contract because Tyler's company was trying to win it from mine. Before we get back to the story, subscribe to the Steel Heart channel and leave a comment below. And if you want to help the channel grow, share this video with a friend and use your hype points on this video. It takes just a moment, but it helps Steel Heart reach a much bigger audience. All right, back to the story. The next morning, Elise acted exactly the way she always did. Coffee, breakfast, phone in one hand, complaining that we were almost out of milk. I watched her move around the kitchen and tried to understand how someone could discuss replacing her husband one afternoon and then ask that same husband whether he wanted eggs the next morning. Apparently, multitasking was one of her strengths. I said nothing. That was the hardest part, not because I wanted to scream at her. By then, the urge to confront her had mostly passed. I wanted information. More specifically, I wanted to understand exactly what Tyler was waiting for. So, later that day, I looked up his company. I already knew the name. Elise had mentioned it often enough that I probably could have embroidered it on a pillow. The moment I saw the company's current projects, everything clicked. They were bidding on a major contract connected to my employer. Not some minor service agreement nobody cared about. This was a serious deal. Several companies were competing for it, and Tyler's employer was one of them. I sat back in my chair. Well, that's interesting. I finally understood why Elise kept talking about that contract. Tyler wasn't exaggerating. If his company won, whoever was responsible for bringing in the deal would look very good. And from everything Elise had told me, Tyler had attached himself closely enough to the bid that success could push him into the promotion he wanted. That was what they were waiting for. My wife was apparently planning the end of our marriage around somebody else's quarterly business results. Efficient, I'll give her that. There was another problem. My own company was involved in evaluating the deal. I wasn't the person making the final decision, and I certainly couldn't snap my fingers and award or kill a contract. Real companies generally try to avoid giving one irritated husband a large red button marked "Destroy Vendor." But my position meant I understood how the process worked, knew some of the people involved, and had access to information that people outside the company absolutely did not. The kind of information that could give a bidder a serious advantage. And I immediately understood something else. I had to be careful, very careful. I wasn't going to sabotage Tyler's company because he was sleeping with my wife. Tempting? Sure. Stupid? Extremely. I had a career of my own, and I wasn't about to burn it down just so Tyler could join me in unemployment. So I did nothing. For several days, absolutely nothing happened. I went to work, I came home, Elise continued pretending to be my wife, and I continued pretending to believe her. The strange thing was how easy she made it. Once I knew the truth, I started noticing little things I'd ignored before. Not evidence, just behavior. Her phone was always close. Tyler's name occasionally appeared in conversation and then disappeared again. She seemed unusually interested whenever I mentioned anything happening at work, but I didn't interrogate her. I didn't need to. Then, 4 days after the barbecue, Elise did something so ridiculous I almost respected it. We were finishing dinner when she said, very casually, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "You know Tyler's company is working with yours, right?" I kept my face neutral. "I know they're bidding on something." "Yeah, that." She took a sip of water. Then came the masterpiece. "Could you maybe help him a little?" I looked at her. "Help him how?" "Nothing major. He's been working really hard on this. I thought maybe you could give him a few pointers." "Pointers?" "You know, advice." I leaned back slightly. "What kind of advice?" "I don't know, Warren. You work there. Maybe tell him what your company is looking for." For a second, I just stared at her. My wife was asking me to help the career of the man she planned to leave me for. There should be an award for that level of confidence. Instead, I asked, "Did Tyler ask you to talk to me?" "No." The answer came a little too quickly. Then she corrected herself. "I mean, we talked about it. He mentioned that you might know more about the process." "And you told him I'd help?" "I told him I could ask." She gave me that warm little smile I had seen thousands of times over 10 years. "You don't mind, do you?" I almost laughed. Instead I said, "What exactly does he want to know?" "I'm not sure. You two should talk." "You want me to meet with him?" "Why not?" That was a surprisingly difficult question to answer without saying, "Because he's sleeping with my wife." So I shrugged. "Okay." Her face relaxed immediately. "Really?" "Sure. Thank you." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I looked down at hers. 4 days earlier, I'd heard her call me an idiot. Now she was using that idiot to improve her boyfriend's career prospects. I had to admit she was committed to the bit. "When does he want to talk?" I asked. "I'll text him." She picked up her phone almost immediately. That part made me smile. Apparently, Tyler had been waiting by the phone for this completely spontaneous idea that definitely hadn't come from him. A few minutes later, Elise looked up. "He says whenever works for you. Tomorrow after work?" She typed. "He can do that?" "Great." And just like that, my wife scheduled my meeting with her lover. Marriage really does require teamwork. The next evening, I met Tyler at a coffee shop not far from my office. I chose a public place deliberately. He was already there when I arrived. "Warren?" He stood and shook my hand. "Thanks for meeting me." "No problem." We sat down. For the first 10 minutes, everything was perfectly normal. Tyler asked broad questions about how our company handled outside vendors. What mattered in long-term partnerships? What kinds of problems usually hurt proposals? Nothing inappropriate. Nothing I wouldn't have said to anyone else. I gave him general answers. "Reliability matters." He nodded. "Obviously." "Pricing matters, but cheapest doesn't automatically win." "Right. Implementation risk matters." He took a few notes. If the conversation had ended there, Tyler would have walked away with nothing more than generic business advice he could have found online. But Tyler wanted more. What about our proposal specifically? I'm not involved enough to comment on your proposal. He nodded slowly. Sure. A minute later. Do you know how we're ranking? No. That wasn't entirely true. I had some idea, but he didn't need to know that. What about the other bidders? Who are we really competing with? You know I can't discuss that. He smiled. Had to ask. Now you have, he laughed. We moved on, or at least I thought we did. A few minutes later, he tried again. Look, Warren, between us, I don't need anything crazy. Just something that helps us understand where we stand. I already told you what I can tell you? I know. He leaned forward slightly. But you obviously hear things. I took a sip of coffee. Everybody hears things. Exactly. That doesn't mean I repeat them. Tyler smiled again, but this time it looked forced. Of course. For the next few minutes, he backed off. We talked about work in general. Then, right before we left, he said, if you ever come across anything useful, let me know. I won't. He laughed. I didn't. His smile faded a little. I'm serious, Tyler. If it isn't public information, I'm not giving it to you. Understood. Good. Clear boundary. Conversation over. I went home. Elise was in the living room. How did it go? Fine. What did you talk about? Work. Did you help him? I answered what I could. That's it? What else was I supposed to do? Nothing. I was just asking. She looked disappointed. Just disappointed that her husband had apparently failed to provide premium service. I sat down. Then she said, this contract is really important to him. If they get it, it could change everything for him. I looked at her. She didn't realize what she'd just said, or maybe she did and simply assumed I wouldn't understand. After all, I was the idiot. I'm sure it could, I said. That ended the conversation. I thought Tyler would leave it there. He didn't. The next afternoon, I received a message from him. Thanks again for yesterday. I replied, no problem. A minute later, sorry if I pushed too hard, lot riding on this one. I looked at the screen, then typed, I understand. Another message came. If you hear anything about where we stand, I'd appreciate a heads up. I answered, like I said yesterday, I can't share non-public information. That should have ended it. Instead, I get it. I'm not asking you to do anything for free. I stared at that message for several seconds. There are moments in life when somebody walks toward a hole, sees the hole, receives a verbal warning about the hole, and then asks whether you'd accept money to help them jump into it. Tyler had reached that moment. I didn't assume what he meant, so I asked, what do you mean? His answer took a couple of minutes. If you can give me something useful about the evaluation, I can make it worth your time. Personally, I read it twice. Then I typed, are you offering to pay me for internal information about the bid? This time the pause was longer. I could practically imagine his brain working. There were several good answers available to him. No, you misunderstood. Forget I said anything. Tyler chose none of them. Instead, he wrote, I'm saying if you help me get an edge here, I'll make sure you're compensated. Nobody needs to know. I leaned back in my chair. Well, Tyler, he had finally done something useful. I took screenshots. Then I saved the entire conversation. Not because he was sleeping with my wife. That problem belonged in divorce court. This problem belonged somewhere else. And Tyler had been kind enough to put it in writing. The next morning, I reported Tyler's messages. I simply sent the conversation to the appropriate people and explained exactly what had happened. Tyler had asked for non-public information about an active bid. I refused. He offered to compensate me personally if I gave him an advantage. And because apparently subtle corruption wasn't one of his strengths, he had confirmed the offer in writing. I also disclosed that I knew Tyler personally through Elise and asked to be kept completely out of anything involving his company from that point forward. That mattered. I wasn't going to touch the contract process myself. I didn't need to. Tyler had already done enough. After that, I went back to work. That same week, I also spoke to a divorce attorney. That conversation was considerably less satisfying. Nobody slid a folder across a dark table and said, "We'll destroy her." Mostly there were questions, documents, practical explanations, and reminders not to do anything stupid with money or shared property. Fair enough. I wanted out, cleanly, and preferably before she had the opportunity to announce that she was leaving me, once Tyler's new title looked impressive enough. At home, nothing changed. That was almost funny. Elise still had no idea. She talked to me normally, slept beside me, asked what I wanted for dinner. Once she complained that I'd left a cabinet door open. I apologized. It seemed easier than saying, "Sorry, I've been distracted by your affair and the upcoming collapse of your exit strategy." A few days later, we were sitting together after dinner when Tyler came up again. Elise looked at her phone and smiled slightly. Things seemed to be going well for Tyler. I kept watching the television. That's good. He thinks they have a real chance at the contract. Does he? Yeah. And if they get it, his promotion is basically guaranteed. I looked at her. She tried to make it sound casual, but I remembered every word from the barbecue. Get the contract first, get the promotion, then we'll talk. So this wasn't casual for her. She was waiting for the result too. Sounds like it's pretty important to him, I said. Very, I nodded. I hope it works out exactly the way he deserves. Elise smiled. Me too. I had to look away to keep from laughing in her face. For the next several days, I heard nothing about the internal review. I didn't ask. I had reported what happened and removed myself from the process. Whatever came next wasn't my decision. Meanwhile, Elise seemed almost excited. She never said why, obviously, but I could see it. She was waiting for something, a message, a call, a result. I wondered whether she had already started imagining her new life. Then, one afternoon at work, I got confirmation that Tyler's company was no longer being considered for the contract. The issue had been escalated after his attempt to obtain confidential information. I didn't get every detail, and I didn't ask for them. I knew enough. They were out. Tyler's golden ticket had just been canceled. I sat at my desk for a moment and thought about telling Elise. Then I decided against it. Why ruin the surprise? I got home at the usual time. Elise was already there. She seemed distracted. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah. Sure?" "Just tired." I nodded. We ate dinner. She checked her phone several times. No Tyler update. Not yet. The next day, she was even quieter. Then, that evening, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and immediately stood up. "I need to take this." "Go ahead." She walked into the other room. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, she came back. Her face had changed. "What happened?" I asked. "Nothing." "That didn't look like nothing." She hesitated. "Tyler's company lost the contract." I gave her a small nod. "That's unfortunate." She stared at me. "You don't seem surprised." I shrugged. "Companies lose bids." "No, something happened. They were removed. Tyler says there was some kind of complaint." "Warren, do you know anything about this?" I looked directly at her. Before I could answer, her phone rang again. Tyler. She picked it up and walked away. This call lasted longer. I could hear her voice rising, though I couldn't make out every word. Then silence. A few seconds later, she came back into the room. This time she wasn't confused. She was furious. "What did you do?" I put down my phone. "About what?" "Tyler. His company started an internal investigation. He's been suspended." That was fast. Her eyes narrowed. "You did all this. You showed me those messages." I looked at her. Tyler had figured it out. Probably around the same time, someone from his company asked why he had offered money to an employee of a potential client. "You reported him?" "Yes." Her mouth actually fell open. For someone who had spent weeks thinking I was an idiot, Elise looked surprisingly shocked that I knew how to forward a conversation. "Why?" I almost asked whether she was serious. Instead, I said, "He offered me money for confidential information. You could have just ignored it." I did ignore the first few attempts. Then he offered to pay me. "You knew how important that contract was?" "Yes," I said. "You mentioned it several times." She stopped, just for a second. Then I watched the realization begin. Slowly, beautifully, her expression changed. "You..." I waited. "You knew." This time she wasn't talking about Tyler's messages. I leaned back. "Knew what?" Her face went pale. "The barbecue." I said nothing. "You heard us." It wasn't a question. I looked at my wife of 10 years. "Yes." She stared at me. "You heard that conversation?" "Every important part." "How much?" "Enough." Her mouth tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" I almost laughed. "Why would I? You seemed pretty confident. You said your idiot husband didn't suspect a thing." She froze. I continued. "You said you were waiting for Tyler to get the contract and the promotion before you left me. And you said I wouldn't figure anything out until you told me yourself." She looked away. "So I got curious?" "Curious?" "Yeah." I shrugged. "I wanted to see how far you'd go." Her face hardened. "So this was revenge?" "No. You destroyed his career because of me. I didn't destroy anything." "You reported him." She stared at me. I leaned forward. "Let's make this very simple. I told Tyler I couldn't give him internal information. He offered me money anyway. I asked him to clarify. He confirmed it." I paused. "That's not a setup. That's a man volunteering evidence." "You could have deleted it." "I could have. But you didn't." "No." "Because you wanted to hurt him." I shook my head. "Tyler tried to buy confidential information connected to a major contract. Reporting that wasn't revenge." She laughed bitterly. "Oh, please." I stood up. "You want revenge?" I walked over to the cabinet where I had left the folder earlier that day. Elise watched me take it out. I returned to the table and placed it in front of her. "This is because of you." She looked down, then back at me. "What is this?" "You can read." She opened the folder. Then she looked up. Divorce papers have an amazing ability to end an argument. For once, Elise had absolutely nothing to say. I sat across from her. "You were right about one thing," I said. "You were going to deal with me when the time came." I nodded toward the papers. "I just moved up the schedule." Elise stared at the papers for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "You already talked to a lawyer?" "Yes." "When?" "After the barbecue." "So you've been planning this the whole time?" "You were planning to leave me for Tyler. I was planning to make it official. I'd say we were both keeping busy." She pushed the folder away. "Warren, we need to talk about this." I laughed. "That's interesting. You weren't planning to talk to me until Tyler got promoted. That conversation wasn't what you think." "I heard it, Elise. You heard part of it. I heard you say you were waiting for his contract before leaving me. Which missing part turns that into a misunderstanding?" She had no answer. Instead, she went back to Tyler. "You've ruined his life." "No. Tyler tried to bribe me. He panicked. That contract meant everything to him. Then offering money for confidential information was a strange way to protect it. You could have warned him." "I did. I told him no." She stood up. "You did this because you hate him. I barely know him. He's going to lose his job." She stared at me as if she were waiting for me to admit I'd secretly manipulated the entire thing. I hadn't. That was the best part. I hadn't changed a bid. I hadn't leaked anything. I hadn't called Tyler's boss demanding his head. I'd simply given Tyler a chance to take no for an answer. He declined. Elise lowered her voice. "I don't want a divorce," she said. "What you want and don't want doesn't matter to me anymore. My answer is in the folder right here in front of you." She stopped arguing. There wasn't much she could do with her own words. I told her the divorce was happening. That night, I told her to pack her things and leave, and she did. She probably went to Tyler, but I didn't care anymore. A few days later, Tyler was fired. I learned about it from Elise. She came home, dropped her bag on the counter, and said, "He lost his job." I looked up. "Okay. That's all you have to say? What would you like? A moment of silence?" She glared at me. "You're enjoying this?" "No, but I'm not mourning his career either." His promotion was obviously gone. The contract was gone. And now the impressive future Elise had been waiting for had disappeared with it. For the first time, she was getting exactly what she'd been afraid of at the barbecue. Tyler without the promising career. Apparently, romance looked different without the promotion attached. The divorce moved forward. I kept my distance from Elise. I assumed the two of them would finally be together openly. After all, I was no longer standing in the way. Turns out I had given their relationship too much credit. Without the excitement, the secret meetings, and Tyler's supposedly brilliant future, things deteriorated quickly. He was angry about losing his job. Elise blamed him for offering me money. He blamed her for convincing him I would help. That detail made me laugh when I eventually heard it. Apparently, even after everything, I was still somehow involved in their arguments. A few weeks later, Tyler was gone from her life, at least romantically. He eventually found another job, but it was nowhere near the position he'd had before. No big promotion, no career-changing contract. He was basically starting over several steps below where he'd expected to be. And Elise? For a while, she was simply alone. Then, several weeks after she had moved out, she asked if we could meet. I almost said no, but curiosity won. We met for coffee. She looked tired, no dramatic entrance, no big speech. She sat across from me and said, "I made a terrible mistake." "I know. I'm serious." "So am I." She ignored that. Tyler wasn't who I thought he was. I took a sip of coffee. "That's convenient." "It's not about convenience." She looked down. "Everything changed after he lost his job. He became angry all the time," she continued. "He blamed everyone, me, you, his company. And I realized I'd built him up into someone he wasn't. I destroyed our marriage for nothing." "No, you destroyed our marriage for Tyler when you thought he was getting promoted. The fact that he turned out to be a bad investment doesn't change that." Her face tightened. "Do you have to make everything sound so cold?" "No, but it saves time." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said it. "I want to come home." I looked at her. "I want us to try again," she said. "I know I don't deserve to ask, but 10 years has to mean something." It did. "Then give me a chance to fix it." I could have argued. I could have reminded her of everything she'd done. Instead, I asked one question. "If Tyler had gotten that promotion, would you be sitting here right now?" Elise said nothing. I waited. She looked down at the table. That was her answer. I stood up. "Warren, no, please. There's nothing left to discuss." I left. The divorce was finalized later. Tyler had to rebuild his career somewhere else. His relationship with Elise was over. Elise got the independence she had apparently wanted, just without the successful replacement husband waiting for her. And I moved on. For a long time, I kept thinking about that afternoon at the barbecue. Especially one sentence. My idiot husband doesn't suspect a thing. She called me an idiot because I trusted her. Maybe she was right about that, but there was one thing Elise forgot. Even an idiot only needs to hear the truth once. If you felt this story hit hard, drop a like, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support keeps Steelheart beating.